Knowing how to code isn't enough to get you a job as a software engineer anymore. In this video, I'm going to explain the 3 skills you need to get a job as a software engineer outside of just learning how to program. My name is Scott. I didn't study computer science. I wanted to be a software engineer in Silicon Valley's best tech companies. So I busted my ass teaching myself computer science, contributing to open source, and eventually working at companies like GitLab, Autodesk, AppSumo, and a few others. Now, number 1 is testing. If you haven't heard of testing as it relates to software engineering, testing your code is writing parameters that ensure that the code you're writing is doing the thing you expect it to do. Testing can also help you design your systems using methodologies like TDD or test-driven development. Now, there are 3 approaches to testing that are important to know before you go into an interview. The testing are unit testing, integration testing, and end-to-end testing. And there's a really important article that I'll reference down below on the testing pyramid. To me, unit testing is the most important because it gives you the biggest bang for your buck and the most feedback as a software engineer. This is what unit testing looks like in a simple function.
So here's an example of how I write a super simple unit test for a super simple function. I have a function called add numbers that just makes sure that the parameters are numbers. So I check if type of A is not equal to number or type of B is not equal to number. I throw an error. Else, I'm just going to return A plus B. So in the test, I have a describe block for add numbers. When parameters are positive, it returns the sum, as you can see here. When parameters are not a number, it throws an error. So then here I pass a string instead of a number, and that's how I test.
Integration testing, as it relates to front-end development and maybe back-end development, I'm speaking more about front-end, is when you test how maybe a modal works with a list inside of it. So we're not just testing that the modal opens, but we're testing that when you open the modal, I can see some things. And the last is end-to-end testing. And what that means is we're going from user interaction to database and server, database, and then back again. And what that does is test the complete suite of the feature. In the article mentioned below, it's testing pyramid. You want the most amount of tests to be unit, the second most amount of tests to be integration, and then the smallest amount of tests to be end-to-end. And that's because as you go up the pyramid, the cost of maintaining and the cost of those tests failing because of a service going down increase. So we want our base to be for the lowest cost, second lowest cost, and then highest cost. So to recap point 1, it's really important you as a new software engineer or maybe experienced software engineer to get experience testing your code because most companies in the higher echelons, if not all companies, require that you understand when to use what kind of tests and how to test your code so that the product is more reliable and scalable. So the second skill that I think is really important is code reviews. So you working on a team, a skill you're going to need to acquire is, before you interview and before you work on a team, is knowing how to give and receive code reviews. Now, giving a code review is simple in practice, but complicated when you haven't done it. A good code review starts with understanding what the pull request or merge request is doing. That's step 1. And usually there's a ticket assigned that says, this is the work that needed to be done, and this is the code associated with that work. The second step is validating that the code fulfills that ticket requirement. The third step is giving actionable feedback, either in the code implementation or maybe the feature implementation. For example, the expectation on the ticket was that when you click the button, it makes a request to the server. Maybe the author forgot to implement a loading state, and you notice that. So you give actionable feedback. I noticed that when I went through this feature, the loading state was missing. So that's actionable feedback. Another thing could be the implementation detail of the button and how the component props or whatever is being passed. It's important to also understand the difference between a blocking and a non-blocking comment. And I'm going to link below a friend of mine, Paul Slaughter, who is a senior or staff software engineer at GitLab, has a guide on conventional comments and how you implement those in a pull request review. So that was giving a good code review, but we also need to know how to receive a good code review. And when we're working really hard on a project and working on a solution, it can be easy to take things personally. So we want to eliminate that. And we just want to do the inverse of kind of what that person, what we just talked about in the giving a good code review. So what we want to do when receiving a good code review is going through each comment that the code reviewer gave us and then deciphering, is this something I can do in a follow-up, or does this need to be addressed right now? And how I like to categorize those are, is this going to create an issue if we merge it in? And then how hard it's going to be to implement the thing. And you have to, through giving and receiving code reviews, you'll get used to how to make that decision. So to recap, point number 2, one of the most important skills before you get a job is knowing how to give and receive a code review. If you don't know how to do this, then you will not be able to work on a team, and it'll be really hard to be successful as a software engineer. And honestly, as a new software engineer, engineers are going to ask you these types of questions. Explain some things that you would find in a code review. Explain how you give a code review. Explain how you receive a code review. Explain how you deal with comments and criticisms in your code. Point number 3, mastering Git. You will run into so many issues on a team if you don't understand basic and complex Git commands, because those actions will affect the code repository and can cause some catastrophic issues. So here are some Git commands that I highly recommend you master. Git add, git commit, git stash, git rebase, git merge. And I want to make it very clear, knowing what these are and knowing how to use them in different situations are very, 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 very important. So to recap this video, the 3 most important skills before you apply to a job is 1, understanding the different types of testing and mastering testing at some level. I recommend unit. Number 2, giving and receiving code reviews on a team. 3, understanding the basic, most important Git commands in your developer workflow. In my opinion, focusing on git merge and git rebase, because those are where most of the issues are going to come from. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please check out one of the last videos I did on how to be a top 1% software engineer from my experience in Silicon Valley